A 20-year-old student woke up early to prepare for her studies and vanished under very bizarre circumstances. From the very beginning, there were many weird and conflicting leads, but despite the massive searches, she remained missing for 3 long years. Eventually, detectives made some progress in the case, but the more they uncovered, the more tangled the story became. Ultimately, her disappearance turned into one of the most mysterious cases in the state, and even after it was finally solved, many questions still linger. Holly Lynn Bobo was born on October 12, 1990, in a small American town called Darden, Tennessee. It was a quiet, peaceful place with just a few hundred residents, far away from big cities. Holly lived there with her parents and older brother. The family loved spending time outdoors. They'd go hiking, fishing, and swim in the little creeks around town. Holly also had a passion for singing and often took part in her local church services. After high school, Holly decided to pursue a career in healthcare and become a nurse, so she enrolled in the University of Tennessee's campus in a neighboring town. By 2011, at the age of 20, Holly was dedicating most of her time to her studies. She also had a boyfriend. The couple had been dating since high school, and they were making big plans for their future together. Holly still lived with her parents since her university was only a few minutes' drive away. Plus, her father had built their home himself, and it meant a lot for the family, so Holly wasn't in any rush to move out. On April 13th, Holly woke up around 4:30 a.m. to get ready for class. A few hours later, her parents left for work, while her brother was still asleep. At about 7:30, Holly's boyfriend called her to tell her that he planned to go hunting on a large piece of land owned by Holly's grandmother and wanted to make sure her family wouldn't mind it. They chatted for a few minutes, and Holly said she'd be leaving for university soon. A while later, one of Holly's neighbors stepped outside and was about to get into his car when he heard a piercing scream coming from the direction of her house. Thinking that something might have happened to a neighbor, he told his mother about what just happened, and she called Holly's mom. Holly's mother tried to call her daughter, but Holly didn't pick up. Growing concerned, she decided to head back home to make sure everything was okay. Holly's brother, who was still asleep at the time, hadn't heard the scream, but shortly after, their dog in the backyard started barking loudly. That's when he decided to look out the window to see what was going on. Holly's brother looked out and saw her standing in the garage with a man beside her. He didn't recognize him because the man was wearing camouflage, but his first thought was that it might be Holly's boyfriend. The brother knew about his plans to go hunting on their grandmother's land, and he often wore camouflage. Since the garage was too far from his window, Holly's brother couldn't hear what they were talking about, but he could tell from her tone that she seemed upset. He decided to call his mom and ask if Holly was planning to go to class that day, or if she'd invited her boyfriend over instead. But his mother interrupted him, yelling that the man wasn't her boyfriend. She then said something quite unexpected. She told him to grab a gun and shoot the man immediately. Shocked, he asked if she was serious, and she replied yes before hanging up. When he looked back out the window, he saw Holly walking toward the woods near their property, with the man in camouflage holding her by the hand. This time, he noticed the man was much taller and broader than her boyfriend. At that moment, he was still confused about what was happening. He tried calling Holly, but she didn't answer. He also called her boyfriend, but he didn't pick up either. Meanwhile, their mom had already called the police. But since she was working in a neighboring county, the call was directed to a different police station. Soon after, her son called her back to tell her that Holly had walked into the woods with this man. He then grabbed his gun and went outside, but by then, Holly was nowhere in sight. However, he did notice splatters of blood inside the garage and immediately called the police. Officers arrived at the house within minutes, but by that time, there was no trace of Holly. Her brother showed them the blood in the garage and described the strange man he'd seen. Aside from the camouflage, the man was also wearing a cap, so he couldn't get a clear look at his face. Still, he remembered that the man had long, dark hair that reached down to his back. He also mentioned that he couldn't make out what Holly and the man were talking about, but he noticed the man had a fairly deep voice. The whole situation seemed strange to the police, but they didn't rush to start a full investigation. The local police department had very little experience handling cases like this, so they weren't sure what to do. In those critical first hours, they didn't search the woods, secure the house, or the bloodstained garage, or even talk to the neighbors. When Holly's parents returned home, they quickly realized that the officers weren't putting in any real effort to find their daughter. After repeated pleas from the family to begin a proper investigation, officers finally organized a search of the woods, spoke with neighbors, and brought in forensic experts to examine the blood in the garage. They also confirmed that Holly's boyfriend couldn't have been the man she was seen with. Besides the fact that her brother had noted the man looked very different, the police verified that her boyfriend was out hunting at the time of her disappearance. The search in the woods turned up nothing, so investigators requested GPS data from Holly's phone. It showed her moving north for about 30 minutes before heading back in the opposite direction. The last signal came from a spot in the woods, just a few hundred yards from her house. After that, the phone seemed to have been turned off. Police went to search that area and soon found the phone. Its SIM card was removed, but there was no sign of Holly herself. The search continued for several days, but led nowhere. Meanwhile, something strange started happening. People in their small town began finding Holly's belongings scattered around. First, someone found her lunch container on the street, then a receipt with her name on it. Another resident came across her school card. It was all pretty strange, but the police still couldn't figure out who was leaving these items. They considered that it might have been Holly herself, or maybe the person who took her. With no progress in finding Holly, investigators turned to the list of convicted criminals in the area. Soon, their attention shifted to a local man named Terry, who had multiple assault charges on his record. Digging deeper, they found that his victims shared striking similarities with Holly in both age and appearance. Terry also matched the height and build description of the man seen with Holly, so investigators began looking into his possible involvement in her disappearance. They obtained a warrant to search his home, but found no evidence. Next, they set up a wiretap, monitoring his calls and conversations for several weeks, but they still couldn't uncover anything that connected him to Holly's case. The investigators continued looking into other suspects and kept expanding their search area. With each passing week, more and more volunteers joined the effort, but despite their combined efforts, the search operations brought no results. For the next several months, there was barely any progress in Holly's case. Eventually, the police called off the ground search, shifting their focus entirely to investigating potential suspects. But this didn't lead anywhere either. Holly's family was devastated. They had no clue what had happened to her, where she might be, or if she was even alive. They also blamed the local police department, feeling the authorities hadn't put in enough effort, especially in those crucial first days. Looking back, the family realized the police had taken almost no action in the first 72 hours, which are often critical in missing persons cases. Despite their frustration, complaints, and constant push for a more active investigation, Holly's fate remained unknown. This went on for 3 years, until something unexpected happened. In March 2014, police arrested a local man named Dylan, known to authorities for his involvement with illegal substances, on charges of unlawful weapon possession. During his interrogation, he made an unexpected confession, claiming he had seen Holly after she was abducted. According to Dylan, on the day of Holly's disappearance, he had gone to his brother Zach's house to pick up a car. When he entered the living room, he saw his brother, their mutual friend Jason, and another person, Holly. She was sitting in a chair, looking terrified. Dylan claimed that Zach told him he had kidnapped Holly, assaulted her, and even filmed it. As for what happened afterward, Dylan said only that she was killed soon after the abduction, insisting he had no part in the murder. He also mentioned that his brother had been wearing camouflage that day. The police brought Zach and Jason in for questioning, but both denied any involvement in Holly's disappearance. Investigators also searched their homes for any evidence or the alleged video of Holly's assault, but found nothing. Shortly after this, a woman contacted the police with another unexpected story. She claimed that she had previously lived with a man named Jeffrey, and one day he had shown her a clip from a video where a man assaulted a young woman. Jeffrey told her that the woman in the video was Holly, and that the man doing that was Zach. He also mentioned that the video had been recorded by his brother, Mark. Detectives met with this woman and asked if she'd be willing to call Jeffrey while they recorded the conversation. She agreed, and during the call, she brought up the video. From Jeffrey's responses, detectives felt certain he really had shown her the recording. Shortly after, Jeffrey and his brother were both arrested. During questioning, both denied any involvement in Holly's disappearance and claimed not to know anything about the video. When detectives played Jeffrey the recording of his conversation with the woman, he said he had probably misunderstood her question. He added that his ex-wife's name was also Holly, suggesting he might have misinterpreted what she meant. The police searched the brothers' homes and examined all their devices, but were unable to find the video. They also found no evidence linking the brothers to the other 3 suspects. In the end, they had to release the brothers, as the witness's statement alone was not enough. However, as investigators continued trying to establish connections between these people and Zach, they uncovered another suspect. They found that a man named Shane had been in contact with Zach on the day of Holly's disappearance and decided to question him. They suspected that Zach might have asked him for help in disposing of the body, and during the interrogation, Shane confirmed that he indeed knew where Holly's remains were hidden. Detectives offered him full immunity in exchange for testifying against others involved and leading them to the body. Shane agreed, but for some reason, he was ultimately unable to locate Holly's remains. In the end, the investigators revoked the deal and began considering other ways to obtain confessions or some new evidence against these suspects. While investigators were pursuing this lead, they received an unexpected call. In September 2014, a group of men went hunting in a forest about 19 miles from Holly's home. One of them spotted a large bucket hidden in the brush and decided to take a look. When he turned it over, he found a human skull and immediately reported it to the police. Forensic experts arrived on the scene and collected partial remains, which they sent to the lab for identification. Right away, detectives suspected these might be Holly's, and dental records quickly confirmed it. The remains had been out in the woods for 3 years, so finding out exactly what happened was nearly impossible. But one thing was certain: a bullet hole in the skull confirmed she'd been shot. Now, there was no question, Holly's death was a homicide. With the case now officially classified as a murder, detectives zeroed in on their 4 main suspects: Zach, his brother Dylan, their friend Jason, and their acquaintance Shane. The detectives decided to focus on Jason and brought him in for questioning. At first, he kept denying any involvement, but when the police told him that he could face a life sentence for murder, Jason agreed to testify against Zach. According to Jason, on the day of Holly's disappearance, he went over to Zach's house to buy drugs. Along with Zach, his brother and Shane were also there. They told him they had killed Holly and now needed to get rid of the evidence. Zach then showed him Holly's body, wrapped in a blanket, lying in the trunk of his car. Zach asked Jason to help dispose of the body, and he agreed. While Shane burned Holly's belongings in a barrel, he and Zach drove to the Tennessee River Bridge to throw her into the water. But when they pulled her out of the trunk, Zach realized she was still alive and shot her. Fearing the gunshot might attract attention, Zach quickly changed his plan. He put Holly's body back in the car and drove off to find another hiding place, dropping Jason off along the way. Sometime later, when Zach reached out to Jason, he mentioned he'd hidden Holly's body in the woods, but as it turned out, the location he described wasn't where her remains were actually found. Jason's story about the abduction also raised some questions. According to him, Zach, his brother, and Shane initially went to Holly's brother's house to teach him how to produce illegal substances. There, they saw Holly and apparently mentioned their plans to her. She became outraged, yelling at them to leave. Worried she'd exposed their illegal activities, the trio decided to abduct her. This version seemed odd for several reasons. First, Holly's brother claimed he had never been interested in making illegal substances and had never discussed it with any of the suspects. Second, when he woke up, he saw only one person with his sister, and that person didn't match Zach's description. The only one fitting what he remembered was Shane. Where the other 2 suspects were at that moment remained unclear. Jason also revealed that after abducting Holly, the 3 men took her to an old barn belonging to Shane's grandmother, where they assaulted her. It's worth mentioning that the check with Holly's name on it and her school card were found less than 100 yards from Shane's house. As for Zach and his brother, the police managed to find several pieces of circumstantial evidence linking them to the crime. Right after Holly's abduction, multiple neighbors reported seeing a white pickup speeding away from her house, and Zach owned a similar truck. His vehicle was also spotted by a surveillance camera near her home. Zach's ex-girlfriend told investigators that he had occasionally threatened her, saying something like, "I'll tie you up like Holly, and no one will ever see you again." Several other witnesses claimed that he had told them, directly or indirectly, about his involvement in Holly's disappearance. Police also learned that Zach had threatened his brother, warning him that he'd end up in the same hole next to her if he cooperated with the investigation. Detectives also learned from a local resident that after the murder, Shane and Zach offered him a gun in exchange for illegal substances, and he accepted the deal. He later threw the weapon into the water, where police eventually recovered it. However, there were no fingerprints or DNA on it, so experts couldn't link it to the crime. As the prosecution prepared for trial, gathering all the evidence, the case took yet another unexpected turn. Shane, who had initially agreed to cooperate with the police, but then failed to lead them to Holly's remains, was found dead in a hotel room. Authorities concluded he had done it himself, though the exact reason remained unknown. His lawyer blamed the investigators, insisting they had threatened Shane with a long prison sentence. The suspects' trials were held separately, starting with Zach's. His trial began in September 2017, 6 years after Holly's murder. Though Zach pled not guilty, Jason's testimony, along with other pieces of circumstantial evidence, weighed heavily against him. After a few weeks, the jury found him guilty of murder, sentencing him to life in prison, along with 2 additional 25-year terms for kidnapping and assault. In January the following year, Dylan went to trial. He decided to take a plea deal, admitting to helping with the kidnapping and murder, though the deal didn't require him to testify against anyone else or provide any specific details. He was sentenced to 35 years with no chance of parole. As for Jason, due to his cooperation, he received an 8-year sentence with the opportunity for early release. So, Holly's case was officially closed, but even after that, many questions remained. The prosecution lacked a single solid piece of evidence directly linking the suspects to her kidnapping. No fingerprints, DNA, or other evidence was ever found that Holly had been in Zach's car or home. The suspects' families and defense insisted that the entire case was built on a fabrication. They claimed police first coerced Dylan into making a false statement and later did the same with Jason, threatening him with prison time if he refused. Dylan and Jason's stories also didn't fully align. Initially, Dylan claimed he had gone to his brother's house that day to pick up a car and saw Holly and Jason there, but Jason stated he arrived after they'd already put Holly's body in the trunk, and even alleged that Dylan had been directly involved in the abduction. There was also another questionable detail. According to investigators, the person who led Holly into the woods was likely Shane, as he was the only one whose height and build matched her brother's description. However, Shane had short, light hair, while Holly's brother recalled seeing a man with long, dark hair. A former Tennessee Bureau of Investigation officer, who worked on the case in its early stages, shared a few more curious insights. He mentioned that they requested cell tower data to track the location of each suspect's phone, but none of them appeared to be near Holly's house. However, since cell tower data only provides a rough estimate within a relatively large area, it wasn't definitive. The investigators also revealed that they found a palm print on Holly's car that didn't match hers, her family's, or any of her friends. They compared it to all the suspects as well, but none of them matched either. Yet, there was no certainty that this print was even relevant to the case. Zach's attorney argued that a much more likely suspect was a man named Terry, whom police investigated during the initial months. As we recall, they questioned him, searched his house, and even placed a wiretap on him, but found no evidence to confirm his involvement. Terry's wife claimed she was home with him that morning while he was installing a new bathtub, but the defense attorney argued that her alibi might have been inaccurate. He said that she was actually at work that morning and that Terry had called her there. When investigators checked with the store where he supposedly bought the tub, they couldn't confirm the sale. Adding to suspicions, right after Holly's disappearance, Terry cut off his long, dark hair. According to the attorney, not only could Terry's wife have faked an alibi for him, but she might have even helped him commit his crimes. Terry had several convictions for assaults on other women, and in some cases, his wife allegedly helped him. Lastly, forensic experts couldn't completely rule out a match between Terry's palm print and the one found on Holly's car. While they could confidently rule out everyone else, they couldn't do the same for Terry. Despite all of this, the prosecution remained firm, insisting that the suspect's guilt was proven beyond doubt, with too many circumstantial factors pointing to their involvement. Jason served only 3 years before being released early, but just a few months later, he was arrested again on weapons charges, putting him back behind bars to await trial. Then, at the beginning of 2024, Jason made an unexpected statement. He claimed that his previous testimony had been fabricated, and he never actually saw Holly that day. According to him, he made up the whole story to avoid a life sentence, striking a deal with the police based on lies. Following this, Zach filed a motion for a new trial, but in late September 2024, it was denied. The judge ruled that Jason's statements alone were insufficient to overturn the case, as there were still other circumstantial pieces of evidence against Zach. It's worth noting that at the time Jason recanted his testimony, he was still awaiting trial for his weapons charges. About a month before the judge ruled on Zach's appeal, Jason was sentenced to 19 years in prison. This timing raises questions about his motives. His sudden reversal might have been an attempt to influence his own case and potentially lessen his sentence. As it stands, all 3 men are still in prison, and the only real shot at a retrial depends on whether their lawyers can find new evidence that either clears their names or points the finger at someone else. So far though, there's been no progress on that front, and the prosecution insists that all 3 are clearly guilty. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video. Thank you for watching.